Three-piece micrometer set from Harbor Freight. In total, it was about $30 to $40, and then of course you can get it a little bit cheaper with the coupon. Now that's a really good price for a 3 set of micrometers. That's typically what you would pay for 1 micrometer. That's actually a little bit less than what you would expect to pay for a single pair. So I'm pretty excited to see how these compare to a pretty decent micrometer. I'll use this starrett 1 to 2 that's already been calibrated to measure the standards that come with the kit, and then we'll take the micrometer, measure the standard, and see if the measurements match up. So this has hardened carbide tips as something that it advertises, which is nice. That makes sure that the faces don't wear as you use it. Also means that they're a little bit more brittle, and upon my first feel, it's not the smoothest, but it's not, it's really not that bad, honestly. We'll check this standard. And we're measuring it, I'd say 2 thou over the 1-inch standard. So let's just double check to make sure that the standard is correct, because we might just need to recalibrate the micrometer, which is actually super easy. Kind of feels like the faces on the standard aren't really parallel, but it's... So we're pretty close to 0 right there. Maybe that's about half a thou. It's pretty close. It's not the most accurate, but we definitely know that the micrometer isn't quite right on. With a 0 to 1 micrometer, you can just bring your anvils together, and to make sure they're clean, I'm just gonna tighten a piece of paper in there and then pull the paper out. Kind of feels a little bit, maybe like a little bit of a burr, but that's interesting. We're about a thou off. It's actually really easy to recalibrate the micrometer. You just need the spanner wrench that comes with it, and there's a little hole on the sleeve where your scale is. We can take this and spin this in the direction that we need to. Right there, I just moved that sleeve a little bit. And what it's doing is it's moving this sleeve separately from the thimble. So the scale here is spinning, so that's how we're able to calibrate that. Now when we bring this back, all right, that's close. Maybe just move it a tad more. Right there. That looks good. Now we'll check our 1-inch standard again. Yeah, something definitely isn't parallel in there, like it kind of hits and then tries to spin your standard off whenever we take a look at that. And this ratchet stop on the end of it helps you keep an even pressure on it, because you can tighten this down and get a different measurement every time. So if you keep even pressure on it, you can just kind of tighten that down and then use your ratchet stop so you get consistency. So we're about a thou off, which is interesting because we just calibrated it down there. Let's say our standard is off. Let me measure it again. See, like this starrett doesn't have a ratchet stop on the end of it, which isn't a big deal. Once you figure out, it's kind of a thing you got to learn on how much pressure you put on it. But about right. Yeah, see, that standard says it's almost right on. Seems to be a little off. One thing that I notice whenever I bring these together is if I get it at the right angle, I can see daylight through the anvils, which means that they're not perfectly parallel. And it's not a huge deal, but it can throw off your measurement. And another thing I noticed is it looks like they took the spindle and kind of ground an angle on it. So like, as an example, this is a starrett digital analog micrometer I'm working on fixing currently. Whenever these two come up and touch each other, it almost looks like one full beam. You really can't even tell that it's actually 2 pieces. But whenever you open that, you can tell. So here, they're not perfectly parallel, but also that grind is a little interesting that they ground that in. It doesn't really change anything, it just is different. With a pair of Micrometers calipers, something I can trust, I'm checking the standard here that came with it. And it seems to be just a little bit over 1 inch. Maybe like half a thou, a quarter of a thou, and sometimes it's like dead on, like right there. So I feel like the standard is pretty good, but it's still kind of a mystery. Whenever I take this all the way out, measure my standard, if you look at it, there's our center line right there. There's our 0, and we're about a thou over. Because it shows like 1 thou too big on the standard, whenever I take it all the way back down to the anvil and make them meet, we're dead on. So that's the confusing part, because whenever it comes out here, it should measure this just about exactly at 1 inch, because we know this standard from both with the calipers and the starrett micrometers says that it's not too bad. It's a little bit too large, but not much at all. Where this is saying it's actually about a full thou too big. So it's almost like it's something within the micrometer, but it's kind of confusing because it matches down here and not up here. I'll check out the 1 to 2 micrometer. The 1 to 2 seems to be correct because we know on the starrett micrometer and on the calipers it measured just a little bit over 1 inch, and that looks to be just a tad over 1 inch. So that's appears to be accurate whenever I check it with the standard. Now with a 1 to 2, you can't take the micrometer all the way back down and meet up the anvils to 0, because it just measures from 1 inch to 2 inch. This one appears to be actually pretty accurate, so I'm going to leave that one. Let's go ahead and check the 2 inch to 3 inch. We'll take a look at the 2 inch standard here, and we'll be able to check this on the 1 to 2 inch starrett to make sure it's accurate. If we check the 2 inch standard, get it in place, kind of wiggle it back and forth, and you can see that's reading dead on at 0. When I bring this down, check the standard, make sure everything's seated properly. That reads dead nuts at 0. Now, one thing that I notice here is if I back this out, whenever I put the standard in place, line it up, make sure it's flat with the bottom anvil, it's definitely at an angle to the spindle. If I kind of center that, you can see how that is not lining up. I also think I can sort of visually see it. Just by looking at it, it looks like it's at a little bit of an angle this way. So, I mean, it measures your standard at 0, but it might kind of give you a little bit of inconsistency if you're measuring parts. Overall, these seem to be pretty decent micrometers. They're not going to be a starrett, but a starrett is probably going to be upwards of, say, $100 maybe per micrometer. These are really smooth. Your anvils are going to be perfectly parallel and ground, where these might not be perfectly parallel. It might not be quite as smooth, but you'll still be able to get some good measurements.